Thank you for joining us at the first episode of the PPPP podcast. Today we have with us our first guest, which I've become good friends with, my political opponent and someone I ran against for United States Congress, Monty Montanez. Monty, why don't you just introduce yourself and kind of give us a little bit about your background and let's jump right in.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This whole thing has just been such an experience. You walk away with so many open doors. It's been a blessing. I met you. We've become friends. The GOP nominee, J.C. Yarborough, I'm proud to call him my friend as well. Clearly, I support him. Paul Bondar. Ryan Binkley's a good guy. I mean, there's a lot of good, well-intentioned folks that ran in our district, and I would argue to say that in all the congressional fields in the state of Texas, I truly believe we had the most competitive field of candidates in the state of Texas. And as far as U.S. congressional district races were concerned, we had a lot of really good folks. I mean, I don't think that any one of us that might have been chosen would have been a bad pick. Clearly, I think I was the best pick, but the folks didn't agree with me on that. So I got a shellacking in the polls, but that's all right, though. I learned a lot. I loved a lot. I lived a lot. And I'm happy to have went through that experience, and I'm happy to walk out at the end of that making good friends like you.
Well, the feeling's mutual, definitely, Monty. And for those that don't know, the Texas 32nd Congressional District was a brand new drawn map. The old district kind of moved, boundaries, and the way the district is set up, it kind of looks like a long map of the state of West Virginia, and it goes from middle of Dallas, kind of like, Preston Hollow, and then it goes all the way down to, Richardson, North Dallas, some parts of Plano, all of Rockwall, and then it goes into, all the way down to Upshur County, Wood County, Camp County counties, all the way to almost the border of Louisiana. So very, very large district. I mean, I know when we have to drive to a lot of campaign events, in East Texas, sometimes it's like 6 hours of driving round trip, and sometimes we have to do that twice in a week. So that was brutal. Being on the campaign is brutal. But, it was definitely not what I expected. This is my first time running for political office. I think it was your first time running for political office as well, right?
Yeah, I never, yeah.
And, we all ran because, we felt like this time for us to add back to the community and serve and basically use some of our, business background and being a patriot and being a conservative and being a Republican and go fight. And, it was not something that I expected. I thought I was going to butt heads and fight with everyone in our race. And there was 7 of us. I think only one lady, Amy Carrasco, really never showed up to any of the campaign events. But there was about 7 or 8 of us Republicans that ran. And all of us, till this day, we've all been, become friends. And we were, joking with each other, messing with each other. The night before, we had group chats that we talked and told everyone, hey, we got to go get Proposition 10 to ban Sharia law. Let's all work on that together because we all agree on that. Let's get our voters out and focus on some of these propositions as well as just the vote. But we all send each other prayers. The night before the election, Jace Yarborough, who's the Republican nominee, sent me a nice text and said, hey, up to you no matter what happens tomorrow, good luck, and I pray for you, and I hope you pray for me, and I'm sure he sent the same text to you. It was such a humbling experience, but I remember the first event that we did was at a woman named Colleen's house, and I hadn't met anyone. I'd never done a political speech. I've done a lot of public speaking, but I remember I saw Monty, and he gave me a dirty look from across the room, and his campaign manager gave me a dirty look from across the room. But the first thing I said to you, Monty, I came up to you, I don't know if you remember, I said, thank you for your service, which brings me to this next point. Monty, maybe talk about, your experience being in the military, being a veteran, your business experience, some of the things that you've done in your career, and how that's kind of prepared you for this, next chapter of your life, which is, running for political office.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. So again, thanks for having me on. So I joined this campaign earlier on when District 32 was in the old map. So it was a deep blue district. And so I jumped in not because I felt that I was going to win or lose. So it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding that the representation that we had in District 32 wasn't aligned with my values or Texas values, or for that matter, the Texas that I grew up in. So I was raised in Central Texas. Um, I remember Texas a completely different way. I moved back to Texas around, I don't know, 4 to 6 years ago, after having spent more than 20 years overseas. So, as you hinted at, I am a combat veteran. I come from a long line of service. My father's a combat veteran. My grandfather served as well. So it's just part of the fabric of my family. Yeah, let's just call it a family business, if you will. After having served in the military, I had the opportunity then to live in mainland China for 2 years, where I studied my MBA in American University with the Chinese University. Moved into business after that, out of Hong Kong, and again, just living all over the world between Europe and Asia, doing business on a global scale. I was blessed, met my wife overseas. My wife is Italian, she's from Rome. Beautiful woman. I have two beautiful children we have together. And so after having done business overseas for a long time, being blessed, I had the opportunity to retire in 2020. And in 2022, I went into business for myself with a former military buddy of mine, and just have a small business here in North Texas that we do well. And that gave me the chance to really pursue other interests, that being politics. So I had the chance to walk into the Dallas County Republican Party and say, hey, look, I see some things that are quite concerning. I'm following politics much more intensely. I understand that the current representative for Texas 32 doesn't align with my values. I live here, and I'd like to know how I can help promote and preserve Christian conservative values that I hold dear, and that's just the way that I grew up. So, it started from there and turned into a congressional race, and the map changed, and other folks jumped in and just made me overall a better contributor to the community. And then here we are, right? So we have a friendship, and now I'm on a podcast. So how cool is that?
We were in the campaign trail, and sometimes Monty and I would talk 2 hours after, like, we've been on the, speaking engagement, debating, we're having a forum in a county in East Texas. We get home, it's like 11:30 at night, and then we talk 2 hours till like 1:30 in the morning. And it was so surprising to me, because that was not what I expected politics to be. But, almost all of us, 7 or 8 of us that are Republican in the primary, we all agree with each other very much on a lot of different things. I think we disagree on, minor things and how to do things. But, generally, we all want the same things. We want, Texas values and American values to stay. We don't want people that, are basically coming in here. Every immigrant class. I'm an immigrant, and your family's been here 7 generations. But essentially, all of us in the United States are essentially immigrants. This is a whole country based on immigrants, right?
Everyone came from somewhere else. But here's the thing: we're a Christian nation. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be Christian to be American. No, you have a constitutional right to believe or not to believe, right? But it does mean that we have to embrace and accept that the fundamentals of this country are based off of Christian values, right? And so, yeah, my family, we've been in this country for 127 years. But before that, we came from somewhere else, right? But what we did do as settlers is that we learned to embrace and promote the American way of life, right? And it has evolved into what it is today, and we love it. I love this country. I fought for this country. And I hope that my son does the same. And I encourage everyone to take in that civil service, right? Or that service before self. And you heard me talk about this a lot on the campaign. I'm a huge proponent of service before self. Service is one thing, and that can turn into people becoming self-serving. But service before self means that you listen, you learn, and you engage in everyone around you. You respect them, no matter if the conversation is tough or not.
And Monty, you brought up a couple of good points. I was born a Muslim, even though my family never really practiced Islam. In fact, my dad was an atheist, and my grandfather was an atheist. And funny enough, both their wives, my mom and my grandfather's wife, were very, religious, or my mom wasn't religious. She was very spiritual. She believes in karma and, doing good deeds, but, she was never a Muslim. But my grandmother was Muslim, and she prayed for my atheist grandfather and my atheist father, who was an Air Force officer. My father did all his Air Force training here in the U.S. in San Antonio in 1972, 74, and 76. Went back to Iran, and then went to a couple meetings about overthrowing the government and got court-martialed and given a death sentence. He basically said, "Hey, I don't think we should have an Islamist government. We should have a secular government." And he went to one meeting just to see what they had to say, and then they charged him with blasphemy and gave him a death sentence. What saved his life is the Iran-Iraq war, actually, because he was in logistics and they needed to move troops. So I grew up. And my mom, she also was a non-commissioned officer in the Air Force. She worked for Lockheed when they were here in the U.S., went back to Iran and worked as a kind of a contractor in the Air Force. And then, so I grew up. I remember my dad taking me to Mehrabad Airport, where a lot of it got bombed just recently. But I remember going over there, seeing the F4s and the F5s and the T-38s and these fake dummy bombs, and I was just obsessed with planes. And my dad was selected, top of his class of 15 in the academy. And in Iran, they only had one academy for Air Force, Army, and Navy. So in that academy, he was going to be an F-14 pilot, and his mom told him she would disown him if he became an aviator. So he ended up going to logistics. But I grew up and we grew up in California before we moved to Texas. So I was there.
You were in ROTC, right?
I was in JROTC Air Force. In fact, I was the second highest rank in my school. I was a captain. And then when I moved here in Plano, they didn't have Air Force JROTC, so I did Army JROTC. But I also, when I was in California, I was in Civil Air Patrol at Edwards Air Force Base. I would, help direct traffic and do all kinds of stuff at the air shows when they had the Edwards Air Force Base air shows. And then separately, I went to the National Leadership Forum on Security and Defense as a kid. Basically invited kids that wanted to be in defense. And I had the honor and the pleasure to meet a lot of interesting people. I went to the Pentagon as a kid. Went to the
Nice.
White House. I was 14 years old, and I was just I just thought it was the coolest thing ever, right? And a couple of cool things that happened. What's that? Yeah, I mean,
Have you been back to the Pentagon since? Have you been there since?
I've not been back to the Pentagon since. I remember seeing the desk where the Declaration of Independence was signed. And funny enough, this is during Bill Clinton's tenure in office. And when we were there, Hillary Clinton was there, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, the First Lady's here at the Pentagon." We never got to see her, but I remember going through all the I had a camera and going through the security on my dad's old school camera, with the old film, and going into going to the Pentagon, it ruined the film, and I was really mad because I had taken a picture with this gentleman who was a congressman who was really nice, and his name was Sonny Bono. And how that came about is I wanted to go in the Air Force Academy, so I asked. They basically let us loose one day, say, go to the Hart Building or whatever other building and find who your congressmen and senators are to get, everybody wanted to go in academy, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, whatever. Everybody was there for that reason. So we all wore our ROTC uniforms and then went to Capitol Hill. And remember in the old days, you didn't have phones with computers on them, right? So you had to go look up on a encyclopedia who your congressman was, and they had announced it, but I hadn't paid attention. So I went to Barbara Boxer's office, who was at the time a senator from California, because I was in California, and then Dianne Feinstein, who was a junior senator, I believe, at the time.
Oh, wow.
Barbara Boxer wasn't there. We couldn't meet with her. We waited there for a long time. Dianne Feinstein came and screamed at us, "Get these kids out of my office," and kicked us out of the office. And that was my first interaction with a Democrat. I was like, I don't think I like Democrats, And then the kid that I roomed with.
They are always upset about something, aren't they? I don't know what to do.
They always are. And it's funny, the kid that I roomed with, which, by the way, I'm 14 years old, was the first time I ever played poker. This kid taught me how to play poker. And one night we sat there with quarters playing poker, and I was just, by the way, I played poker professionally for 5 years of my life. But that happened all because of that trip when I was 14. This kid taught me how to play poker, and me and my roommates played poker. But this kid that taught me how to play poker, and I can't remember his name, but he goes, "Listen, he was from Palm Springs." He goes, "If you don't know who your congressman is, go with me. I'm going to go meet my congressman. He's famous. Is Sonny Bono." So we go in there, and Sonny Bono, we just got kicked out of Dianne Feinstein's office, so we didn't have, good hopes. But we show up to Sonny Bono's office, and he goes, "Hey, kids, I'm sorry I'm late for a vote, but you guys are awesome. You're the future of this country. Come in here. let's take a picture. He took that camera I had my dad, took a picture with us,
Right.
give us a hug and give me a business card. I still have that business card for
How
Sonny
cool is
Bono's
that?
business card. And then, sadly, shortly thereafter he passed away, or not shortly thereafter, a while back thereafter, but he passed away. But that was my first experience with politics. Little did I know, 20 something, 30 something years later,
You'd be running
I was
for
going to run
Congress.
in for Congress.
Yeah.
And these are the people that inspired me. And that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask. So many kids have messaged me, Iranian kids, Hispanic kids, all kinds of kids. They're all like, hey, we are interested in politics. What do I do? What career do I have? What do I take in school if I want to be a congressman? And I had this kid that actually came and helped us in our campaign and was an intern. It was so good to just, kind of pass that along. But I get so many people that ask me, what do I do if I want to get involved? What should I do? What message would you give these people?
Well, first and foremost, I would say think long and hard about who you are and what you believe in, right? Because, folks will tell you one party or the other party. Parties change. I mean, if you look at the Democratic Party or the Republican Party 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, they're not what they are today. So I would always tell everyone, think about who you are, what your values are, and where your moral compass is, right? Let that guide you. And that'll define where you think you fit in politically. That's number one. Number two, then, when you understand who you are and which party most closely aligns with that, then walk into that, your local county Republican Party headquarters, and just say, how can I help? I mean, that's what I did. Like, literally, I just walked into the Dallas County Republican Party. I saw the executive director, and I said, hey, I've got some extra time. What can I do? How can I help? And that's how my journey literally started. I didn't know that journey and that question would lead me into running for office. I never would have thought I'd be sitting on a podcast before, talking to folks and just sharing my opinion. I don't know. I wasn't really big on social media and all this kind of stuff. But now I see myself posting all the time. And I mean, you could say I'm opinionated, but we all have opinions, right? It's just about being able to be confident with who you are and then be willing to share that with other folks, right?
So another story that I remember from that trip that I went to Washington, D.C. Imagine my first trip to Washington, D.C. I remember my dad had to, we didn't have phones back then, right? So my dad had to get a flight for me on United Airlines and had to switch flights in Chicago. And he's like, remember, Home Alone? Remember that airport? That's the Chicago airport. This is how you go find your flight. So, and then he had told the flight attendants, my kid's 14. Can you make sure he's flying by himself? So I went there, and it was just such an amazing experience. It really kind of made me grow up. But one of the cool things is, they had all kinds of different events. And, I went to my very first athletic event. I went to Washington Capitals hockey game. We all went as part of that event. So that was the first time I ever went to a sporting event, or at least, large, like hockey, baseball, basketball, football sporting event. But one of the other things, there was an event one night, and, in Washington, it's like, I vaguely remember it, but we were there, and there was, it was kind of like a cocktail hour, and they invited a lot of people, and I think they had the military recruiters come recruit us. There was the NSA and CIA and all these different people trying to recruit us and, talk to us as 14, 15-year-olds that are all trying to go to security defense when they graduate high school, right? And I'm just there, and, I'm socially awkward. I'm a kid. I don't really know much. And as we're standing there, this nice gentleman, I'm standing with one of the kids, this nice gentleman comes and talks to us, and he's like, hey, kids, you guys like the movie Top Gun? And we're like, hell yeah, I've watched it like 15 times. He goes, you know Maverick in that movie? And mind you, this is 1994, so this is like, I think Top Gun came out in 1984, right? So it's like 10 years old. Not the new Maverick, but the original Top Gun, right? We're like, yeah, I've seen that movie a million times. He goes, well, my name is Randall Duke Cunningham. I'm congressman from San Diego, and that movie is my life story. It was based on me. I wrote the script, and and let me tell you, when you're a naval aviator, I was, so basically, Top Gun was the story of Randall Duke Cunningham. I think his back seat was William Driscoll. I want to say. I got to go look that up. But this is a guy who basically a lot of the things in the movie, like he buzzed the tower, he did that. He actually did something else. He broke in because he wanted to show off to his classmates that he had the highest grade in like some athletic challenge that they did in the academy. So he broke in and almost got court-martialed over it. And he was an instructor at Top Gun. That's how he made the movie.
Wow.
One of the things that he said to me that kind of stuck at me, he goes, You know, Tom Cruise, when he was, filming the movie, he was not allowed in the officers club, because these wings that you have here, these aviator wings, you have to earn them. There's no way, as an actor, you have access to that. And it's funny because, I mean, it's not funny, but this guy's a war hero. He was one of, I think, two or three only aces in the Vietnam War. He actually flew the F-4s. And then I looked him up just, not too long ago, recently, and I realized that he was a congressman that actually went to jail for, taking the money from defense contractors. But imagine, this is a guy that served his country, was an ace in Vietnam, and probably for a few bucks, a mistake that he made, he ended up being in prison. I saw President Trump actually pardon him, I think in his first time, and I want to say in a couple of years ago, he passed away. But here's the thing that bothers me. Nancy Pelosi is in Washington, and she's enriched herself this much, but this is a guy who's a war hero for a mistake that he made. His career was over, and in the new movie Maverick, they don't even talk about him. They don't even talk about the fact that the movie was based on him. He wrote this. He wrote the script.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that until you just mentioned
Yeah,
it.
it was because he was a Republican congressman. He was a war hero. Nobody talks about it.
So that brings up a point. Like, I mean, how did you feel? I mean, I feel like I know what the answer is on term limits, because we both signed the U.S. term limits,
He
right?
did.
But how do you feel about this whole? And it's not illegal, by the way. I saw a podcast recently with Tim Burchett and someone else, Congressman Tim Burchett and someone else, where he was mentioning that. I mean, like, it might have been with Joe Rogan, I'm not sure, but where he was saying, everyone they go in there and they're worth, I don't know, max couple $100,000,
And they leave 30 million.
What's the congressman from the disgraced congressman from Georgia, Green, Marjorie Taylor?
Oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah, she left with $35 million in her bank account.
Exactly, but I mean that wasn't her. So, but the thing is that that's not illegal. So, I mean, they
It's
can.
not illegal, but they make the rules, right?
It's immoral. That's for sure. It's unethical. Excuse me. And how do you feel about that? Do you think that that's something that should be maybe because if we think about congressmen themselves, the senators and the representatives, they're never going to vote themselves out of being able to do that. So maybe it should be a referendum to the people of the United States. It's a national referendum.
You mentioned something great. I don't know if you remember on the campaign trail, I had a policy, issue that I wanted to incorporate if I won, and that was to try to bring, one, obviously, campaign reform, but making sure that, people don't go there to enrich themselves. Now, you're not going to get in the way of people making money because at the end of the day, we're a capitalist society and people have businesses, and most people that go to Congress generally used to be very successful. They already made their money, and they're not going to Congress to make money. They're going to Congress to serve, to add from their experience. They've already made their money. They want to serve people, right? But this new generation of these new congressmen and congresswomen are coming in. It's like the AOCs of the world and the Rashida Tlaibs of the world and the Ilhan Omars of the world. They're going there just to make money. And they're
Yeah,
lying.
well, it's like a whole new social media thing for them, right?
Yes.
They're just they're building a brand name, but hey, but let's call it what it is. I mean, on both sides of the aisle, folks. I saw a post of yours which was quite powerful recently, where you were mentioning there are a lot of folks protesting no kings, Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at a lot of these senators and congressmen, and they've been in there 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, truly believe that term limits have to happen across the board, but not just for the congressman. Because, if we just put term limits on the congressman, what happens? It's just a transfer of power, because the folks that are going to stay there are the staffers.
Right.
And so then that's where the power is, right? So I believe just to say term limits, right? I don't know how that would be qualified, but there should also be some sort of term limit on the staffers themselves too, that they can't be there any longer than X amount of years, because there has to be this fresh blood, these new ideas. There has to be accountability. Folks can't just go there because it's circular. People are just going there right now for self-interest. And I mentioned that service before self, right? Well, that's lost. That concept has been lost for quite some time. People are really just going there to be self-serving at this point. And it's few and far between where you get you get actual servants that go there for the people, that genuinely serve them, not just represent them, but genuinely serve them and their interests in their districts. and then put the Constitution above all. I mean, you don't, God and country, right? I mean, some people talk about it, most people actually live it.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. The adage is that in Congress, senators have all the power, and congressmen don't really have that, or congressmen or women don't really have that much power unless you're a Speaker of the House, right? There's a lot of power in being a Speaker of the House because at the end of the day, there are only 100 senators, but there are 435 congressmen, right? So it's a lot. Your power is diluted a lot more. But more importantly, I think. On the Senate side, I mean, you see Nancy Pelosi leaving, the House with something like a $300 million net worth that she's amassed on a $200,000 salary. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't add up. But they make major decisions, and then they don't have, they're not subject to insider trading, and then they're making all this money. My policy issue was that, hey, if you're making money, a portion of that should be taxed and be paid towards veterans' health care for your district. But you brought up a great point. I think a lot of our youth, and I really want to reach out to our youth because our youth is just so frustrated. I think the jobs are being all stolen from them, and they're, most of it at their own doing by having degrees that are not STEM-related degrees. So the H-1B students are coming in taking those, or H-1B foreigners are coming in taking those jobs from them. An H-1B foreigner is getting pay $200,000 a year to teach English, and then our graduates, because they're getting a liberal arts degree, they're graduating and making $30,000. They can't even pay their student loans that are ballooned into 100, 150,000 after they're done with any normal university these days, because college tuition's got inflation rates that are astronomical. But a lot of the youth is kind of disenfranchised, and you see all the No Kings rallies, and I don't think these people understand. They're out there. And I want to educate them. I want to say, listen, do you know what a definition of a king is? A definition of a king is someone in their realm that they're talking about is someone that's holding on to power and not let go. That's a king. But you're having a no king rally for Donald Trump, who's arguably in his fifth year in office. He had a 4-year term. When he lost, even though he thought the election was stolen, I'm not going to argue about whether he's right or wrong. In his mind, he thought that the election was stolen, but he still, respected the democratic process, stepped down and let Sleepy Joe with a brain, with a dead brain, run the country and run it to the ground. And now he's back at 1-year office. So he's been in office for 5 years. How can you call Donald Trump, whether you like his policies or not, but just procedurally, just mechanically, how can you call somebody that's only been in office for 5 years a king while you have people in the Senate? Chuck Grassley's been in office 51 years.
That's insane.
Mitch McConnell and the Republicans and Democrats. I'm not defending Republicans.
That's what I'm saying. It's on
Mitch
both sides of the
McConnell has
aisle.
been in office 45 years. 41 years. Chuck Schumer has been in office 45 years. Nancy Pelosi has been in office 39 years. That's a king. Those people, do you know every policy that's gone through the Senate the last 50 years, Chuck Schumer's touched that. One person having that kind of power, that's a king. Yeah. Donald Trump being in office 5 years,
and then
8 years, that's not a king.
And when you're in office that long, how much in touch are you still with the average person?
Not at all. Listen,
do you really know what's going on out there?
24 years ago, I was a volunteer in John Cornyn's office. John Cornyn run for Senate. John Cornyn was Attorney General of Texas, kind of like Ken Paxton is today. And he ran for office, and I was a volunteer. And he was a young, energetic guy, middle of the road. Now he's a Bush Republican, Rhino, middle of the road. He's been there too long, and he's old. Like, listen, I was the kid when I was 24 years ago when the first time he was running. Ken Paxton at an event last Monday said, listen, he's going to be the longest running senator running. I mean, just give a chance to somebody else.
Where I was raised in Central Texas, Bell County, there's Representative John Carter. He's like 82 or 84 or something like this. I mean, he's been there forever, for sure over 20 years, if not close to 30 years. It's time to hang up the boots, brother. It's time to let someone else, get in there fresh, new thoughts, more energy, that actually understands what's going on.
Would you vote for Valentina Gomez?
I'm not going to answer that question. But what I will answer is I truly believe that someone that's going to represent a district, you need to be from there. I'm not saying that you had to have been raised there and born there your whole entire life. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you really need to
Present. You got to
understand.
be present. Yeah.
You got to be present. You can't just show up. I got here 6 months ago, and
Carpetbagger.
from your carpetbag. Yeah, coming in from out of state, and you just moved in the district, and then pretend to understand what's going on just because you had a couple conversations. You don't know what's going on, right? So you may be well intentioned. You may have great ideas, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't represent a constituency, but what I am saying is that you should probably be invested a little bit longer in the community that you live in, or at least the state of Texas. At least understand what it is. Because I tell you what, man, Texas is great. Everybody's moving here. We've got Y'all Street in Dallas now. I mean, shoot, I'm running Tex 32. I wasn't raised in Tex 32. I'm not from East Texas. I've only been in Dallas since 2022. So about 4 years now. So I'm not from Dallas, but I was raised in Texas. So I know what it's like to be Texan, right? So
I was actually raised in Texas 32, but let me tell you, I found out the hard way. My mom went to the polls to vote, and she was so excited, and she's always such a big cheerleader of mine. And, I always tell her, Mom, calm down, don't go crazy, don't, because she's like, oh, do you know my son? My son, she does this all the time at the grocery store. I'm like,
I'm proud of you.
I know, but this time I'm like, Mom, go to the polls, tell everybody, I'm your son, and just go nuts. I'm not holding you back this time. She goes there, and she comes back out, and she was so upset. She goes, they didn't let me vote for you. They said I was in the district. They said that, this is District 4. It's not District 32. I'm like, Mom, that's impossible. So me and my campaign manager, we're about to go to the, and she was first day of early voting. I'm like, we're going to go to this library, and I want to find out what the heck. I grew up in this district. What are you talking about? We go there, and Adam's like, hold on. Before you go over there and start something, let me double check the map. And we double checked the map, and even though I grew up in District 32, the day of the election, 17th of February, whenever it was, the early voting, when they redistricted, they took like just my mom's neighborhood out of the district. So even though I grew up in the district, I'm no longer in the district, and my mom's no longer in the district. And we found that out the hard way, and it was like she was so upset that she couldn't vote for me and like till this day she's upset, by the way, that she couldn't vote for me.
Well, so but that unless it's just me from what I know. Let me share my experience. When everything was remapped, it was completely confusing, and up until election day, you couldn't find a map. Secretary of State, there's no definitive map with the lines to know exactly where the district begins and it ends. And by the way, the new map of District 32, in my personal opinion, looks like, if you blow it up, it looks like the state of Oklahoma. You have a little panhandle, and then it kind of pancakes out. I say this because much as I love Texas, and I'm Texan, and for all you Texans out there listening to this, don't kill me. But boomer sooner, baby. I went to University of Oklahoma, like a lot of North Texans do. And so I couldn't help but see the state of Oklahoma, the district looked like the state of Oklahoma. And I thought, how ironic. But nonetheless, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know I just didn't know the details. And so if I didn't know and I'm running for office, or you didn't know and you're running for office, imagine the average folks. And, that kind of boils down to election day itself. It was a shit show. I mean, I voted in my precinct. I live in North Garland. I live in the district. And by the way, when we were in the old map, I lived in closer to Highland Park, but still in my district of a Park Lane. And when September they remapped, October 1st, I moved into my district. I moved to North Garland. And I did that because I believe, and not to take this away from anyone else, I'm just talking about my personal beliefs. If you're going to represent a district, you got to live in the district. You got to be able to, walk the streets with folks that you're going to represent. And that's not taking anything away from anybody that didn't live in the district. That doesn't mean that they can't do any better or less. I'm just talking about how I feel. Okay? So I did do that, and I moved into my district. And so on election day, I was standing right next to, I voted my precinct there in North Garland. I was next to Angie Chen Button. She was there, and there was a big, strong supporter from Jace that was there too, with a big Jace thing, whatever. And we're all talking, and we're getting along. Some other folks there, and there was somebody running for county judge or something. And the whole time we're talking, we're having a great time. I had no idea she was a Democrat. She had no idea. No, she must have known I was a Republican because I had a pin on, but I had no clue who she was. But Angie and I were sitting there talking and everything, and I saw lots of folks being turned away. Lots of folks. And it was confusing. It was confusing because between the Secretary of State and lots of other things, look, I don't know the details behind it, but what I do know is that the remapping could have been managed a lot better. It definitely could have. But you know, look, at the end of the day, the people spoke. They, as far as the Republican primary was concerned, they selected overwhelmingly Jace Yarborough and Ryan Binkley. Ryan's a great guy. Jace, as you know, I was the first out the gate to support him and endorse him. I prayed on it. He's a great guy. We had a conversation. I believe in his message. And like you said, all of us, more or less, we all agree on exactly the same things. We just prioritize those things in a different way, right? And that's it. You know, the distinction I think between myself and a lot of other folks is that my priorities were different, but I almost never disagreed with anything anyone else was saying for the most part. There were some candidates that at times I would say that it didn't align with their messaging, but most of the candidates with most of the topics I was more or less aligned with, and I think that made for a good field of candidates for the constituency to pick from. And in the end, we ended up with Jace. I think he's going to be a great congressman. I think he's going to represent Texas 32 very well. And I'd say go to jaceyarborough.com, visit him. I am plugging him. Thank you for letting me do that. Because I want to do everything that I can to make sure that he gets across the finish line and we get him elected in November. He's a great guy.
I think all of us showed up, Saturday morning. You were there, I was there, Paul Bondar was there, Daryl Day was there. We all showed up for Jace. Jace is just, a great young man. He's Air Force veteran, Texas undergrad, Stanford Law School. And, we all became friends. I think one day during the campaign trail, I think we were in Rains County, one of the counties in East Texas. I walk up to him and I was attacking him a little bit on social media, not personally, but his stance.
Yeah.
And
which actually, sorry to interrupt you. Actually, the first time that I remember meeting you, we were on stage together, and it was a forum. And
was it Rockwall Forum?
It might have been Rockwall, and I had not ever remember meeting you before, right? Campaigns are crazy, whatever. You go to advance, and so, but it was the first forum I think that we sat together on that I was aware of. And you were just impressive. And I looked to my left and I was like, who the hell is this guy? I mean, you just came out of nowhere and you were just guns a-blazing, sharp as all hell. I mean, I was like, okay, I had no idea. I mean, there were a lot of people on the stage I didn't know, I wasn't aware of, right? So we all started getting to know each other. Probably folks didn't know who I was either. But you definitely made a name for yourself in the district and amongst the candidates from that day onward. So, I mean, you ran a heck of a campaign, brother, and I'm happy to call you a friend.
Well, I appreciate it, and so you do. I mean, it's interesting. It was hard for me to disagree with people because people are going out there and like, I agree. I believe in this. I believe in this. I'm like, me too. I'm a Christian. I'm like, me too. By the way, I'm a brand new Christian. I've been a Christian a year. I've been studying Christianity for about 4 or 5 years, and last summer I got baptized. And I have another friend named Monty Bennett, and he and I joke around together. He calls me the Sheik, Iron Sheik. He goes, "Hey Sheik, these people are in East Texas. They're gonna think you're full of crap. They're gonna think you just became Christian just because you're gonna run for office." I was like, "Yeah, but I decided to run for office December 8th, the day of." Which, by the way, when I went to sign up in Austin, Valentina Gomez was sitting right next to me. She goes, "What are you running for?" I said, 32. She goes, "I'm 31." I was like, "All right, thank God." I knew who she was. But anyway. But he goes, people are going to think that, this whole being Christian thing is fake. I was like, well, I never even had inspirations to run for office. I always thought about it at some point in my life I was going to serve. But me being a Christian, I think may be what really drove me to want to run for office and make a change. And you said that things, you know my story. I've been a refugee twice, once from Iran and Germany to California. Another time in '95, we moved to Texas and we're refugees from the state of California. We're the first wave of refugees, after the riots and the floods and and the mudslides and all that stuff that happened and the earthquake in California. Our parents just had enough, so we moved here to Texas in '95. But Texas is such a different place. I went to Plano Senior High School, And I thought it was funny that the Plano Young Republicans wouldn't want to have you and I on their forum, even though I was the only one that went to Plano Senior High. I'm having my 30-year reunion there this year. Plano's changed so much. I remember Plano was a senior high school. My graduating class, I want to say it was 1691. I'm good with remembering numbers. And it was the second largest in the United States and the largest in the state of Texas that year.
Oh, wow.
There was a group of us, like 5 or 6 of us. We called each other the Brown Crew. It was me, my friend Adrian, who's Mexican, my friend Raymond, and Sachin, the 2 Indian guys, my friend Zagros, who was Kurdish, and then another friend Ali, who was also Iranian. That was it. It was just, we were the Brown Crew. Everybody else in the school was white. And today, you go to Plano and this big culture mix and the demographics have changed. And Texas has become, Dallas was a small town the size of Cleveland. Today, we're the, third largest metroplex, just recently, I think, past Chicago. And, we're right behind LA and New York in terms of the size of this metroplex. But the amount of, you talked about the Texas Stock Exchange coming here, so many different corporate businesses coming here. But all of this is for good policies, lowering taxes, and not having too much government overreach, which is, I moved to New York for 8 or 9 years, and I decided to move back to Dallas during COVID because of, what was going on during COVID, putting the masks on and not being able to go get a burger if you didn't have your vaccine cards. The same playbook happened in Iran, and I got PTSD from it because it reminded me in Iran, they'd be like, oh, if you don't wear your hijab, we're at war with Iraq, you have to be a patriot, you have to wear your hijab. I was like, what does one have to do with the other? During COVID, it's like you have to wear your mask, or you have to have your cards, your vaccine card. It just really reminded me of this totalitarian, system that was a playbook that they did in Iran during, when essentially the Soviets and the British helped the mullahs get in power. That's exactly what happened. Right? So, you also mentioned, I've been to China 30 times, north of 30 times. I've been to Hong Kong. I actually did Hong Kong University in Science and Technology as an exchange student. You mentioned you spent some time there. So I've been all over Asia. I've been 42 different countries. What unique perspectives would you say that, not just being in the military and serving, but living in all the different countries gives you about your, Texas roots, your conservative roots, that when you come back home, it makes you really want to appreciate what we have here, where I think a lot of the kids that grew up here, were born here, don't appreciate.
So that's a mixed bag of a response. Yes, I lived in mainland China for 2 years. I lived in Hong Kong for 8 years. And then I lived the rest of the time in Europe. So I also lived in Miami. You mentioned, I think you mentioned Florida, that you were down there for a while too, or something like that. But I lived in Miami for 6 years. But in every place that I lived in, the companies that I worked for gave me the chance to work the entire region. So I was the head of Asia Pacific, and then head of Latin America, and then took on global roles, et cetera, et cetera. So led teams everywhere, and I've had the opportunity to do business around the world. And so living abroad, some of the takeaways if we start with Hong Kong and mainland China, it's not just about what you appreciate when you're there, some of the liberties that you have and you take for granted when you're in the United States. So when you come back home, you're like, wow, okay, so me being able to surf the internet and see whatever I want, or write a Twitter response in disagreement of someone else and speak my mind, go to church, being able to profess your faith. This is not around the world. You don't have the same types of freedoms that you can enjoy that we take advantage of or we take for granted here in the United States. On the same token, when you're abroad, you also realize that oftentimes here in the U.S., we become closed-minded. And we feel like we have the answer for everything, and we don't look outside the box. When we want to be innovative, there's not anyone in the world that can even match us. But when we have groupthink and we fail to understand that there are other ways of doing things around the world, and looking at those best practices and making them American and making them Texan helps with our survivability, helps us move forward, right? I feel like we're doing that now. I feel like we're understanding that we have been falling behind the rest of the world, and that has a lot to do with the politics through the Obama years and through the Biden years, and we believe the world, and to some degree, it is flat, right? So the global expansionism that we had, opening markets, free markets all over the world, and offsourcing all of our production at the time seemed like a great idea. And I think it's the worst thing. And this comes back to Bill Clinton, right? A lot of folks, they'll look back at Bill Clinton, they'll say, oh, those were great economically, those were great years. Well, yeah, but look at the repercussions today. So the North America Free Trade Agreement, I think, was the worst economic trade agreement that the United States ever entered. Or I would say the second worst. The first worst would be the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, because that was the nail in the coffin. The Free Trade Agreement of the Americas just, I mean, in one stroke, completely decimated our manufacturing and production capabilities in the United States, right? So we outsourced everything around the world because we felt that everyone was on the same page as us. You know, we were very trusting, and that comes back to our Christian values. I mean, everyone starts at 100 with us, right? We want to believe that everybody is doing everything in good faith, and the reality is they're not. I mean, I'm being speculative here, though, but I truly believe that for the most part, most nations in the world are just rooting for us to fail. They really are. And this goes back to the whole America First policy, or country first policy, right? I am totally on board with America First. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with Americans wanting to ensure that, first and foremost, that our wants and needs are met, right? Because when we have the opportunity to empower ourselves, then we're in the position to help others, right? But that being said, if we fail, make no mistake, there are many other countries, even lots of countries that call themselves or consider themselves allies. They're happy to pick up the mantle. They're waiting in line for their turn to lead the world. And so the only way that we can do that is, of course, sticking by our Christian values, because united we stand, divided we fall. We must come together. And that's why, sometimes, I've heard on the campaign trail and other campaigns and et cetera, folks who are saying, unapologetically, they feel that we need to go ahead and focus on our Christian conservatism and the way we think, and we need to push forward in that regard. And I don't completely disagree with that. But at the same time, what we begin to do is we begin to alienate other folks that may believe in other things. And by no stretch of the imagination do I say compromise that. But what I am saying is that if we build walls amongst one another, amongst Americans, then we begin to create division and sow discourse and mistrust. And every great nation, for the most part, has lasted throughout history, has lasted 250 years. And this year we're at 250 years, right? And all those great nations, each and every one of them, for the most part, have failed. Why? Because of lack of faith. And I don't just mean, and I talked about those Christian values, I don't just mean doctrine, religious doctrine. I'm also talking about trust. And if we don't have trust amongst one another here in the United States, then the easiest way, there's no military in the recorded history of mankind has there ever been a military or country stronger than the United States of America. And today, I don't care what anyone says, there's not a military out there that can defeat us. The only way that we can be defeated and fall apart is if we fight amongst one another, if we lose faith, if we don't have trust and faith in one another. And so that can't be done if we refuse to have conversations with folks, with folks that don't agree with us. If we're uncomfortable having conversations and listening to folks, if we're hard-headed and we stay linear and we maintain groupthink, then what happens is, and there's going to be a lot of other folks, half of the country, that becomes more extreme thinking, becomes much more polarized. And that's one thing that I don't stand for, and that's extremism. I don't believe extremism on any part of the spectrum is healthy at any time.
You actually helped participate in one of the Iran rallies outside of CPAC, and you learned how to say Javid Shah when we went out there. I think people, one, thought it was amazing that two of us that, even though we ran against each other, were adversaries in a political race. We could put our differences aside and come in support of the Iranian people. But I've been very vocal on this issue of Islamification of Texas and the United States, and I get death threats, on a daily basis. But I'm not an extremist. Like, listen, and my entire family is Muslim. I have a lot of really good Muslim friends from various different countries that are very peaceful. But you have to take a stand, and you have to take a very strong stand. I may come across as being an extremist, but I think a lot of people here haven't woken up. I sent a text message out to 42,000 people in our district, and I said, I'm going to close down every mosque. And 4,000 people tell me go F myself, and most of them are American, white Americans. But I'm not saying I'm going to take the Constitution away. I'm not saying that, the First Amendment, which gives you the right to pray to whoever you want, or be an atheist, or pray to a goat if you want. What's happening with the mosques in the state of Texas is, these unconstitutional Sharia courts. Under Article 3 says there's only one court that's supreme, and that's the Supreme Court, and all the constitutional courts set up by the Congress of the United States, all the state courts underneath it, and these mosques are operating essentially a parallel track of justice. And then, more importantly, they're raising money for terrorist organizations like CARE, Hamas, and IRGC, and they're offering help and passport and money and weapons and things like that for people that are sneaking into the southern border. So I just don't think people are waking up on this issue. And Iran had the fourth largest military, fourth most powerful military in the world. Guess what? The Islamists that wanted to defeat Iran in 1979, they knew they couldn't beat Iran because of its military. But what did they do? They destroyed us from within. And that's what I see happening here. And I don't want to take away anything away. Muslims, I love Arabic food. I love Arabic music. I have so many good Arab friends, Muslim friends from all different walks of life. But the extremism, and one of the things I think people, and by the way, I think the way that Valentina Gomez is doing is all wrong, to just call everyone, Mohammed's go home and be racist and say,
yeah, I'm not a fan of how provocative she is, but it works for her, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. Like, when it comes to her, not to disparage her, but her approach, I don't align with. I believe that that's extreme. Now, in your regard, some people may consider you an extremist. I don't, and I'll tell you why. I don't believe you're an extremist because how do I align with you? Why, I mentioned to you, I served, and when you serve, you take an oath to defend this country against enemies, foreign and domestic. And so we talked about how Texas is great and a lot of folks are coming here. America's great and a lot of folks are coming into America. I believe in immigration. I believe in legal immigration. And I believe in strong borders. Am I a fan of, and this is coming as, and while you know this about me, I abhor identity politics. I do have I have Spanish origin. So my father's from Puerto Rico. And my mother's from New York originally, but her family's from Puerto Rico too. And so we're American, and we love our heritage, and that's okay to celebrate your heritage. But when you come to this country, whether you're, and so to your point about the Islamification, when you're in this country and you come from somewhere else, you must pledge allegiance and swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States of America. And when one comes into this country and does not do that, the risk, or what really happens, is two things. One, they bring their nation with them. Okay? So their allegiance, just like the Somalis that are up there in Minnesota. I mean, you saw Ilhan Omar, when she talks about her president, she's talking about the president of Somalia. So clearly her allegiance is not, and she's a sitting congresswoman, her allegiance is not to the U.S. Constitution, even though she took an oath. Her allegiance is clearly to another country. So I believe if you come to this country, or if you were born and raised in this country, you must swear allegiance to the U.S. Constitution, to that flag. Number one.
I agree.
And number two, if having not done that, I mentioned swearing, creating a nation within a nation. But if you come from abroad, not only you are creating a nation within a nation, you brought that nation with you. And you can be American. This is not just specific to folks that are immigrants. You can be in this country, born and raised in the United States, and if you refuse to swear allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, or at least to the Constitution of the United States of America, you also create a nation within a nation. You're not you're not assimilating, you're not becoming part of the fabric of our society, so you don't value our way of life. And so then I believe you don't belong here. There's hundreds of other countries around the world. Go somewhere else. Look, I've lived and worked all over the world. There's a lot of great countries out there. My wife is Italian. I love Italy. I'm not Italian. I'm American. I bleed red, white, and blue. I teach my kids
I
that.
was with
My
CPAC and I saw
children
you
every
speak
single
Italian.
day, my children every single day say the Pledge of Allegiance. Every single day, my children say the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America.
And these are just values that I think a lot of parents are not teaching their kids. I went with Kathleen Huddleston and a few others to testify in front of the Board of Education on Tuesday this past week, and this whole watering down our education and changing, not respecting our founding fathers and not respecting the Judeo-Christian roots of this country. Even though we have freedom of religion, this country really was created by Judeo-Christian values. It was created in that realm. And here's another thing, there's something like 57 Muslim countries in the world, and most of the immigration in the world that's happening is from these Muslim majority countries to Christian countries. And let me explain, I've been in the immigration business for 16 years. I run the EB-5 program. I've been all kinds of different parts of it, from a lawyer to, running a regional center, to being a developer, to now being a broker dealer and helping people find projects that are suitable for them to make sure they can get their money back and get their green card. So 16 years I've been in this business, and I've seen all the fraud and all the misuse and abuse of the H-1B program, because it's a parallel program, and we see a lot of the same immigration attorneys that are kind of involved in that. But the number one reason that people move to the United States, from China, from anywhere, the number one reason is education and secondary education. The United States, we have 250 of the top universities in the world. And if you look at the list of the top 10 or top 20, I think 9 out of 10 or 18 out of 20 are in the United States, in the world. And then if you look at the list of the top 300-400 universities in the world, I mean 70-80% are in the United States. Although we struggle on high school education, that's because the Department of Education sucks. But our secondary education, bar none, is the best education. But also, a lot of people that come here from these Muslim countries, the reason they come here is because of our education, and that's because of the Judeo-Christian educational system. So then they want to come here, and then they want to change that educational system. And by the way, guess who that hurts the most? Them. Because the reason that they like this country, the reason this country is successful, is our education system and the Judeo-Christian education system. So if you're coming here and you want to try to change that to the old school education system, for whatever country you're bringing, then this is going to turn into the same hellhole that you came from. Not to disparage that. I came from a war zone. I came from a country that has 5,500 years of civilization. Now it's a third world country because the Muslim mullahs are running it, right?
And so, and so to your point, a lot of folks that are coming here, it's not just education. And then what do they stay? They stay because they have the advantage of things that they don't have in the countries that they came from. So safety and security. I'm not saying that everywhere, because through Hollywood, a lot of folks will be like, oh, so in Europe, they'll be like, it's so dangerous in the United States. No, United States, yes, there are places that are not safe, like anywhere in the world. But by and large, everywhere you go in the United States, it is relatively safe. And we have something called rule of law, which many countries in the world do not have. And when they come to the United States and they see that things work, they see it being less bureaucratic. They see that if they want to start a business and they want to become the best version of themselves, there's that opportunity. So you can climb socially and economically much more quickly than you can anywhere else in the world. I mentioned, being in Italy, I looked into starting a business in Italy, and when I discovered the process behind it, I thought, this is absurd. And I didn't start a business in Italy, and I would never start a business. I love Italy, love the food, love the wine, love the people. I consider it a second home. Hey, look, our founding fathers took inspiration from both the Romans and the Greeks, and you see it when you go to Capitol Hill.
Persians, by the way.
Yeah, and the Persians as well. Exactly.
Thomas Jefferson had 3 books that he read. One was Machiavelli's The Prince, And then the other two were two different versions of Cyropedia, which is a study of Cyrus the Great, which is mentioned in the Old Testament. Cyrus the Great, Cyropedia, the story was actually written by the Greeks because the Persians hadn't written down history yet. But one version he had was in the native Latin, the other one was in English, but he decided not to copy after Machiavellian prince and ruling by fear, but by creating states, which I don't know if you know the old stands. Ostan in Farsi means state, so all the old Hindustan, which by the way, India used to be called Hindustan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, all the stands were states of the Persian Empire. What they did is they all had their own customs, laws, religions, but then they were part of a bigger empire, which was, and that's, Thomas Jefferson copied that, rightfully so. People that hate the United States don't realize that we have the best of everything in the rest of the world combined here. We have, so many different cultures here, so many different religions, so many different people, and all the different food, all the different inventions, everything here. But what makes the United States so successful is that even though a lot of the youth, they think we're living, in this country that's, stolen land, all this made up crap that's just garbage, right? Every country is stolen land, by the way. It's, you either won it through war or you won it through conquest. Every country in the world is stolen land. So the whole thing.
How far do you go back? I mean,
Yeah.
Look, we are where we are. The victor tells the tale, right? We are where we are. So I'm a strong believer in not erasing any part of history.
The good and the bad. You need to know it. Like
You need to know so we don't repeat the mistakes.
You need to go read Hitler's Mein Kampf to see why this lunatic. People would listen to him, and he almost wiped out a whole race. He killed 6 million Jews. You need to understand that. People are like, I don't understand. People, you don't read that. This is taboo. No, you need to understand history, good and bad. The same way that, in school they make you watch surgery and giving birth and things that are uncomfortable because you need to know it. You need to understand it. And I think this whole thing about our kids being coddled is just, it's ridiculous. But we're celebrating our 250-year anniversary of the United States, and I'm in the immigration business. Everybody in the world wants to live in this country. If that's not the biggest stamp of approval that we live in the best country in the world, I don't know what is.
Yeah, nobody's rushing to move to the majority of other countries in the world. And that being said, you're mentioning the greatest country. This is the greatest state in this country.
It's the best state in the union, and Dallas is arguably the best city in the state of Texas.
Absolutely, and we see that because tons of folks they're flocking from specifically from California, New York, and all these Illinois and all of these failed states. And they're moving to Texas and to Florida because for all the obvious reasons I'm sure the audience is aware of. I mean, low taxes, easy to start a business, cost of living is low, and people just mind their own business. You can be the best version of yourself so long as you don't come here and pretend to change Texas way of life. And that's my fear is that with all of these folks that are leaving because of high taxes and crime and everything, and these states that are flooded with illegal immigration and socialist ideologies like New York. I mean, who would have thought that New York City after 9/11, whatever? I mean, if someone had told you during 9/11 that X amount of years forward that there would be a socialist Marxist,
Islamist. Islamist too.
Islamist that would be the mayor of New York, they would have called bullshit on you, right? But that's what has happened. So now they're trying to do these like Canada right now with these exit taxes and this kind of stuff to try to keep people there. I can't speak to Canada and their laws, but in the U.S. I find that unconstitutional. I'm sure that'll be challenged. But folks are leaving, but they're leaving New York and these states and coming to places like Texas. They're coming because of the crime and because of the oppressive state, if you will, the failed state, if you will. But it's mostly driven by monetary factors. And when they come to somewhere like Texas, even though they're coming because of those issues I mentioned, they're still maintaining that philosophy and that socialist left-leaning ideology. So my fear, not all of them, but many of them, and my fear is that when they start coming to the red states and they're gravitating towards the cities, and Texas, as well as I do, Texas is red, but the cities are blue. And if they come here and start to change our philosophy, our ideology, and transform our way of life, then Texas doesn't stay the way it is. It doesn't. The reasons why they came here, that starts to change in and of itself, and then you just have California 2.0, right? and they don't see that. And you see a lot of folks that are coming from California, New York, and they're coming here and they're just, you know, planting the way they think and the way they live over here. And when you're from Texas, you're like, oh, hold on a second. If you're going to move to Texas, not only if you move from somewhere else to America, do you need to accept, embrace, and assimilate to America, but if you come to Texas, you need to do the same thing. We have a way that we like to live here
Don't
in
California my Texas, and don't Sharia my Texas, right?
That's right. You need to be Texan. You need to embrace, and if you don't like that, then you don't belong here.
You know, I think-
what? There are 49 other states that you can move to.
I remember I got a T-shirt that said Texas plus 49. I won't say the wussies is what I would say on the podcast. But you know, it's interesting. I get so much hate mail when I talk about radical Islam. I'm not saying that 1.9 billion people in the world are bad people. There's a very small portion of Islamists that are radical Islamists. And by the way, Mamdani is unfortunately one of them. I call Ayatollah Mamdani. Ayatollah Mamdani believes.
I love that. I've heard you say that before.
Yeah.
I've actually used it. I've stolen it from
He
you.
believes in the 12th Imam. People don't know that Hindustan was a part of Persia and Pakistan was a part of Persia as well. Well, Hindustan was a big country that split up from Persia. And the Islamists, they did so much killing. They killed over 1 million people in India, so much so that they had a civil war and they split up. The Muslims took Pakistan and India took the rest. And by the way, there was a few Muslims that were left over, and those few Muslims that were left over in India were actually the more radicalized than the Muslims in Pakistan. And one of those families was the family of Ayatollah Khomeini, which was the 12th Imam. And one of those other families that was kicked out of India, actually, that went to Africa, is the family of Ayatollah Mamdani. And, the 12th Imamers believe the world is coming to an end, that the Mahdi is coming, and the Mahdi is going to help them kill all the Jews, and they're going to take over Jerusalem and rule Jerusalem. I mean, that's crazy. That's why, and I don't want to, talk too much about war, because I don't want to bring back, your PTSD from having served. But a lot of these crazies in Iran that are there, first of all, they can't have nukes, because the entire thing about nukes is the threat of mutual destruction, right? The threat of mutual destruction doesn't work with an IRGC with a death call that wants the world to end. I mean, some of the things I think people don't understand is that why do these people are like, there are people that are going to like Khamenei and other grave sites of these leaders that were killed by Israel and the U.S. And they're like, oh my God, you're so lucky, you're a martyr. I wish I was like you, I could be more. They glorify death. They glorify this act of dying. And then it's in Gaza and in Palestinians, they actually, it's a double-edged sword. They do, negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. The positive reinforcement is like, if you die, you're going to go to heaven, you're going to get your 72 virgins. And then the other part of it is that, they take care of your family. They're like, oh, I don't want to die because I got to take care of my mom or my sister or my family. They're like, no, now you're a martyr. Now we're going to, for the rest of eternity, we're going to take care of them and we're going to give them food and sip. So they encourage these people to go blow themselves up and die, because they're like, oh, my family's taken care of, and I'm going to get my 72 virgins. We're fighting against this death cult, and everybody needs to wake up. I'm not saying anything bad about Muslims. Muslims are good people. There's a lot of 1.9 billion good people, but there are 20, 30, 60 million radicals that the other Muslims are not saying anything about.
Yeah, they
I
say
encourage you have to stand up to those radicals, because those radicals are making the good Muslims look bad, and that's the part I think people don't understand.
Yeah, well, so there's around 2 to 2.2 billion Muslims in the world. Let's round it to 2 billion. And it's between 15 to 25, they say statistically 15 to 25% are radicalized. So we're looking at a population of 300 to 400 million radical Muslims. That's the population size of the United States of America. I mean,
I honestly don't think it's that many that are radicalized. I think it's a lot less than that.
I hope you're right. But even if it's 50 or 60 million, that's still the size of a big, large country. I mean, that's a lot of folks that want the destruction of Western society, And so I don't advocate war. I don't advocate violence. But you can't stand by and turn a blind eye to aggression. You just can't, and I don't agree with, Iran and the current regime, and for the most part, it's been proven that they are they're at the forefront and one of the leaders in advocating for radical Islam around the world and terrorism. So, making sure that this current regime is destroyed, that we stay the course. And I know in the short run, I mean, look, it's going to be tough for first and foremost for the people of Iran, for the people that are there. Secondly, for the people that have family there. And then thirdly, the rest of the world, principally Americans, because we're going to, we're really, we're feeling the pressure on this, right? Politically, economically. It's a small price to pay to ensure that we secure the safety of and security of everyone in the world, right? And so, what that looks like in the end, I don't know, but I'm a big fan of, for face value anyway, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Pahlavi, that he, once they have the opportunity to end the regime and they bring in a new government, that he would lead that government, and then leave it up to the people of Iran to decide, what that future looks like, what type of government makes the most sense to them, right? And I hope and I pray that it ends up looking more like what we have in the United States, but maybe it's something like a constitutional republic. I mean, that could something similar to
monarchy, yeah.
Constitutional monarchy, excuse me. Something more like England or Spain, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to understand what's best for the Persian people, but I think that Prince Pahlavi, that he's got the right idea. I've heard him speak on a number of different occasions, both at CPAC recently and then here in Dallas and Arlington. But also, I follow him online, and thanks to you, I'm always up to speed, and the wider Persian community on what's going on in Persia and in the Persian diaspora. So I pray for the people of Persia. I pray that for the end of the war to come, but not at the expense of the freedom of the people that live there and their families abroad.
The Crown Prince, I think secretly, he has actually converted to Christianity. I don't think he wants anyone to know his faith. I've seen him he went to Liberty University. I see him do prayers before he gets on stage. And, it's a touchy subject. I think, there's something like 10 million underground Christians in Iran. I say a woman who was, sentenced to death for passing out 20,000 Bibles. So who's getting these Bibles? People are getting them, right? I did Iran Alive Ministries. I think you met Dr. Hormoz, Shariat, and he has a congregation of about 120,000 people inside Iran, and he said there's about 7,000 Muslims that watch his show. 7 million Muslims that watch his show. There's a lot of people that are Muslims that just don't identify with praying in Islamic. To Saudi Arabian prophets, they identify a lot more with Jesus, who was more closer to home, and their original language is Zoroastrian. So a lot of people going back to Zoroastrianism, Christianity. Some people don't have faith, but I think you'll see once Iran becomes free, you're going to see a lot of there's something like 400 classical churches that are still operating in Iran. I think some of those will flourish and come back to life. But the whole point is, I think people just in Iran, they just want freedom, basic freedoms. Just the freedom of being able to show your hair or wear a short sleeve shirt or dance to music.
Which seems like a silly thing, right?
Just basic things, And the other thing I think that's interesting is that, there's a lot of world powers, and the European powers have been, kind of reaping the benefits of the regime in Iran. They're getting the oil and they're getting the resources. Funny enough, all these people that are kind of ignorant and uneducated, they're like, oh, the U.S. is attacking Iran to get its oil. Iran has been giving away free oil or oil at $23, $24 below barrel price to China. And China gets 90% of Iran's oil and doesn't even pay Iran. In return, it gives them surveillance technology for the people for the government to surveil the people, whether it's internet, VPNs and then cameras everywhere. And those people, they're like, they don't think about, the fact that Iran's oil has been plundered. U.S. got none of it the last 47 years, but all these other countries, Russia, China, the U.K., and all the European powers have been plundering Iran's natural wealth.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we look at all the issues, and not to disparage our allies, but we look at, we can't forget history, right? And so we look at principally the origin of a lot of the modern issues in the Middle East, and they stem from the Europeans, principally the Brits and the French, I mean, they're the ones that decided after World War II to go ahead, or World War One, and then World War II as well. But World War One to go ahead and just carve up the Middle East based on what looked nice on a map.
No, it
As
was
a,
based on how they're going to split the oil. So the way it worked was the Ottoman Empire assets were basically Iraq and I think Germany
Jordan, Syria.
they split it up based on who gets what oil. And the Ottoman Empire ones went to the British, that was Iraq and Syria, and then the rest went to the French. And then Iran, they kind of were backed off because Iran had a strong government, but the British were, they had puppet kings in Iran. They were stealing properties. Shah's father, the crown prince's grandfather, is also named Reza Shah. He basically was a military leader who was a big figure, and he kicked out the Shah and said, "Hey, you're a British puppet. Get out of here, and we're taking over." And he's created the Pahlavi dynasty through that. And there's a lot of misinformation. I think people say, "Oh, Mossadegh was the democratic elected prime minister, and the CIA overthrew." No, he wasn't. The Shah of Iran was the king, was a rightful king, and the king elected someone to prime minister, and then the parliament ratified it, or vice versa. There was never elections where the prime minister, and this is a falsehood, I think, created by the CIA to make it look like they weren't involved in the 1979 coup, which put these crazy mullahs in power because they don't want to have their fingerprints on this death and destruction that they created. The Carter administration, Brzezinski, and the British Crown. This was their creation for 47 years of death and destruction. And today, the Russians and the Chinese, they're protecting this Islamic Republic.
Well, it wasn't necessarily. I like to look at in that period, the U.S. is more the sword, but the hand wielding the sword was not the Americans.
No.
The hand wielding the sword were the Brits.
It was the Brits. They found a peanut farmer who was not very well versed on foreign policy, and in a moment of weakness, with the help of Brzezinski, they fooled them into saying, "Hey, this is how we're going to blockade the Soviet Union. We're going to put all these crazy Islamist governments around them." Well, guess what? Guess who got the most benefit out of Iran in the hands of the mullahs? The Soviet Union. People don't know the Caspian Sea was owned 50% by Iran, 50% by the Soviet Union. And the Caspian Sea has the world's largest gas reserves underneath it, second to the South Pars gas field in the Persian Gulf, which, by the way, Qatar's been, all of Qatar's wealth is stolen from money from Iranian people. Reserve that's shared by the two countries, but the European powers, they starve Iran from technology to be able to drill it and allow Qatar to drill it. It's a whole other topic. The Soviets, basically, when they split up, they said, well, we don't own 50% of the Caspian Sea. Now we're going to each own 20% because there's 5 countries that neighbor it. So Iran lost that, and of course the mullahs got paid under the table to give that property away to the Soviet Union. And now they fought them again. Now Iran only has 13%. Iran used to have 50% of the Caspian Sea, all of the oil and gas reserves underneath the Caspian Sea, and then on top of that, the world's largest production of caviar comes from the Caspian Sea. A lot of the beluga caviar comes from the Iranian side. But all of that was given away with mismanagement and stolen by the Soviet Union. And now more recently, China signed a $400 billion oil and gas deal with Iran for 10 years. Every year they buy $40 billion worth of oil and gas, and they don't pay Iran. They pay it back with their cheap technology junk, and they're trying to use Iran as a place for the Silk Road to sell their cheap stuff to Europe. Now, here's interesting. The Soviet Union is sending so much weapons to Iran, to the Islamic Republic, I should say, to help them survive. China is sending their versions of the C-5 and C-17, these big cargo planes full of weapons and drones and munitions, everything for them to help them stay in power. So they're trying to unleash this radical Islamist, crazy, death-called Muslim government on the world. But the two countries themselves, they don't trust their own Muslim population. The Muslim population, the Uyghurs in China, which, by the way, they're the sweetest, they're the least radical Muslims I've ever met in my life. They're just the nicest. I used to love going to Uyghur restaurants. They have the most amazing food.
By the way, I think there is one. So I've been to, it's in Chinese, it's called Xinjiang. It's a northwest province, and I've been there.
Yeah. I've been to Dalian. I went to the most amazing Uyghur restaurant. I had the best kebab I've ever had in my life.
And so I've been all over the region there, and it's called Yangguochuar, which is the meat sticks, right? The lamb meat sticks. And I love it. I love the food there. And I've come to understand there's actually a restaurant, a Xinjiang restaurant in Plano. So we should
Really,
go
we
there.
should definitely go.
I
I
I I
and I went
love.
to this Uyghur restaurant in Dalian. I had the best kebabs I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, they're
And
so
then
good.
and then I went to Xi'an and we went to the Muslim street there and they had kebabs there and it was awesome. So we did the food
Great
tour,
food.
the terracotta warriors and all that. That was awesome. But it's interesting. So the China controls their Muslim population of 30 million. By the way, Uyghurs are only one of the ethnic minorities that are Muslim. There's like 5 other ethnic minorities in China that are, from Inner Mongolia that are also Muslim. But China keeps a close eye on all of them. They have concentration camps, they have re-education camps. They sterilize them so they don't reproduce because they're scared of Islam. They're and they're scared of the most peaceful, least radicalized Muslims there probably is, other than maybe Indonesia and Malaysia. They're also very peaceful. But China is scared of Islam, but then it's trying to unleash this Islamic government on the rest of the world, not because it believes it, because obviously China is scared of Islam. It's because it's trying to destroy the West. And Russia, the same thing. The Chechens and the people in Dagestan are some of the toughest. I mean, I don't know if you remember from the Afghan.
Dagestan is yeah. What is it? What is what is the meme where it says where you have like a sissy kid or like
Send them to Dagestan for 2 years, forget
two
about it.
years forget about it.
Send them to Dagestan for 2 years, forget about it. No,
Yeah.
but and Putin is so scared of these guys, and Russia fought a lot of wars against Chechnya. So what does he do? He puts Kadyrov, which is a puppet. I mean, the guy Kadyrov is such a puppet of Putin. He constantly wears T-shirts with Putin's face on. I mean, that tells you that he's owned by Putin. So Putin controls this Islamic population, which, by the way, they could be radical because they're warriors. They don't take crap from anybody. But Putin controls them because he's scared of the Muslim population in his own country, the Chechens and the Dagestanis. And then China the same way. And now they're just trying to unleash the world with this radical Islamist crazies in Iran that are 1,000% worse than anything the Chechens would do because they're not. The Chechens just want a peaceful life. Now they're warriors. They're not going to go kill people just to kill people. If you step on their toes, they're going to mess you up like Khabib did to McGregor. But they don't have bad intentions. Same thing with Uyghurs. They're like the nicest, most peaceful Muslims there is, and yet China is scared of them. But then China sends weapons to the Islamic radical state, who, by the way, indiscriminately threw missiles to all their neighbors, attacked more Muslim countries than Israel ever did in its entire existence. And then this is the government that Obama administration gave $150 billion in sanctions relief and trying to hand them nukes. Could you imagine these crazies had nukes?
And they just turn around, they use that all against us. But when I think about all of the games that are being played by the Islamic Republic, it makes me think of you've got this great and that I believe viral meme that's inspired by Game of Thrones for
Yeah.
Iran, and
It's
I
not
love
Game of Thrones.
yeah, it is awesome. And so, well, I don't know who the players are on in detail on the Iranian side, but I'm a huge fan of the Game of Thrones. And so, what inspired you to make that homage, if you will, between Game of Thrones and Iran or the Islamic Republic?
I was, it's so funny. My sister and my brother-in-law, when they lived in New York and they moved back to Dallas, and then I was moving to New York, and they were watching Game of Thrones season 1. I used to make fun of them. I'm like, what is this, Dungeons and Dragons crap you guys are watching, right? So my brother-in-law Peyton and my sister, they're like, hey, you got to come watch this. So I watched a couple episodes, and then I got hooked. So I
Yeah,
started watching the first season, and I got really hooked to it.
yeah,
And it wasn't until, when Cersei had that crazy kind of, it's a famous actor that plays it, the guy that looks like Khomeini, wears like a white gown, and he's like the religious guy who has this crazy religion that he has. That
yeah.
guy reminded me of Khomeini, and I'm like, oh my God, this like reminds me of so much. And then Ned Stark was screwed over. He was the king. He was supposed to be the rightful king. And then the Red Wedding happened, and people got murdered, and his children all got dispersed.
I know,
By
crazy.
the end of the show, his children came back and karma caught up and they finally got the throne back. And that reminds me so much of the Pahlavi family. Ned Stark was the Shah of Iran. Of course, Jon Snow, who's the hero of the show, by the way, was resurrected. The same people that don't believe in Jesus' resurrection somehow believe in Jon Snow's resurrection, fine, but then they have a hard time believing in Jesus' resurrection. Anyhow, the Game of Thrones, one of the reasons that, all 8 seasons, you're sitting there trying to figure out who's really the main, protagonist. Is it Jon Snow or is it Daenerys? And the whole book, and if you read the book, it's even more fascinating because it's a dance of fire and ice, and one represents fire, the dragon, the other one represents ice because he's from the north. By the way, the Shah of Iran, his father, guess where he came from? He came from the north. And
Oh,
then
wow, yeah.
they came from northern Iran, so the king of the north, they came from the cold from the north. And then Daenerys.
What about the dragons and the dire wolves? I've never seen you any.
Yeah, I think the flag of the Starks looks a lot like the Persian flag because it's a wolf versus the lion and the sun. So there's analogies there, but I got a lot of hate actually from Iranians because I compared,
Really?
The leader of MEK, Maryam Rajavi, to Daenerys, and Iranians are like, oh, she's so beautiful, she's the mother of dragons, you can't compare her to Maryam Rajavi, but it's actually true because she was evil all along, and nobody knew for 8 seasons she was all along. All of a sudden, the minute she got her hands on the nukes, the minute she got her hands on the dragons, she indiscriminately started killing innocent people,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, all 8 seasons we're trying to figure out if she's good or evil. And by the way, they're both fighting the evil forces, which is the army of the dead, which is the Islamists, which they're zombies, They don't even know, they're trying to die. They want to die. The people that want to die, they're not scared to die. You think the White Walkers are scared to death? No, the White Walkers are dead. You're fighting an army that's the army of the dead. That's what it is. So the analogy, and by the way, all the other countries, all of the different, Lannisters and the Starks and all the different people that were all trying to kill each other, at one point they called truce. They're like, all right, we got to stop. We got to go kill these animals because these animals, they're zombies. And the more people they kill, the more zombie army increases. Let's call truce. Let's go kill them, and we'll come back. And why I think that Jon Snow is Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is because Jon Snow was always very nice, never did anything bad to anyone. If anything, he got screwed over. And more importantly, he never wanted power. He never wanted power. He's like, hey, I'm fighting for Daenerys, or I'm fighting for the... He was always trying to fight. He never... When somebody's power hungry and want to be in power, that's not somebody you want in charge. Reza Pahlavi's always there. He's like, don't call me king. I don't want to be your king. I don't want to be your crown prince. I want to lead a transition. I'm ready to lead because people trust me, because all the other opposition leaders have been bought and sold, and nobody could trust him. But they know he's the honest guy that could never be bought. People don't trust anyone, but they trust him. So that's why there's just this level of trust that he has, and it's the same level of trust. Remember Jon Snow? People were like, we'll go to war, we're going to die for you because we know you one of us. We know you lead by example. And then the other analogy that I think it's important is that the wall, by the way, this whole thing started when the Crown Prince went to the wall in Israel. He went over there, met with Netanyahu. He's got a famous picture. We had his hand on the wall. And why does the wall remind you of the wall in Game of Thrones? Because on one side, you got barbarians that try to destroy the rest of the world. On the other side, they're holding the fort. Israel is holding the fort. Israel is at the center of, and by the way, the wall has got so many analogies and so many interesting parts, but Cyrus the Great, he took over after 47 years of misery. Cyrus the Great went and defeated Babylon and gave the Jews gold and money to go build the second temple in Jerusalem. And that wall was built by Cyrus the Great. So that's why when the king over the crown prince of Persia goes over there and puts his hand on the wall, he's not going over there and saying, hey, I'm Jewish. He's saying that Judeo-Christian values, this, the Western world, this idea of loving your brother and being fair and wanting to live a peaceful life, it starts right here. And by the way, my ancestors, Cyrus the Great, helped finance and built this. This is the wall where on one side you can have all kinds of crazy wildlings, and on this side you have Western civilization, and we have to protect the wall. So that analogy is really, really interesting and important to me. And there's so many analogies, but I spent hours and hours and hours of thought process and thinking through. And by the way, I had Tucker Carlson as Theon. Theon, he had lost his genitals, and he wanted to do good, but he had no genitals and he had no backbone and became a traitor, right? So that's Tucker Carlson essentially, right? And I thought, that analogy was our Secretary of War Hexeth. I analogized them with Jamie, and Jamie is a kind of complex character, that's got good things, bad things, but at the end of the day, he always had a good heart. And more importantly, people were like, they didn't like the fact that I made Tyrion President Trump, but
No.
don't let his.
I was gonna ask. So I was gonna ask you who is your favorite character?
It's him, Tyrion.
Yeah, well, that's why I stopped you there. He's
Do
clearly
I agree with him all the time? No.
he's the most clever character, in my personal opinion, in the entire series.
And here's something that people don't know. Nobody really pays attention. So if you watch the opening scenes of Game of Thrones and the ending scene, it changes. But a lot of people are trying to figure out who's the actual star of Game of Thrones. Is it Jon Snow or is it Daenerys? And for 8 seasons, people are trying to figure out who the actual star of the show was. It was neither. Tyrion was always. If you ever look at the Peter Dinklage, his name is always first because he's the star of the show. People don't know. And when he was young, he did a lot of dumb things, and he was with prostitutes and drinking and crazy. But then at some point, he got it together. He got his act together, and he was always the smartest military strategist. He was always the smartest. Now people are like, "Oh, you made a midget compared to Trump. Trump's got to be upset." No. The guy is the star of the show, and he's the smartest, and he had balls, and
You made a midget.
he went and got things done.
Yeah, but yeah, if you don't look at the stature of the guy, I mean, he might be a midget, but he's a giant.
He's a giant. I mean, the guy was a military genius. He was a hand of.
Well, he saved
3 times.
The king. He saved King's Landing. I mean, effectively ran.
And he always thought things through, and he always strategized, and by the way, he told things that were unpopular and told people things that he didn't want to hear. But he's like, listen, you're not going to want to hear this, but this is this, and he spoke his mind. That's Trump. That's 100% Trump.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Any other characters that jumped out at you? And by the way, Princess Noor, who is just the light of, and Noor in Farsi means light. And she's the light of the eyes of all the Persian people, and everyone just adores her. And I just thought that was such a great analogy to Arya. And Arya also comes from, Arya. Iran means land of the Aryan. Arya is a Persian name, actually. So I just thought that was just such a great analogy, too. There's a few characters that are left that I haven't decided or I'm still thinking through. I'm going to surprise people, so we'll see. Well, maybe one day HBO picks it up and we'll do a Persian Game of Thrones.
That'd be dope. That'd be cool. Well, and I forget starts with the D. There's a land that starts with the D, and that it escapes me right now. Where remember the prince that was he was a really great fighter, but the mountain ends up killing him.
Right. You're talking about Dragon Land or whatever. Oh yeah.
I can't remember, but anyway.
I'm gonna go back and rewatch some of these old episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. But so that land and the way, how sophisticated the culture was, and great fighters, and people admired, and it was so complex. I wish I remember the name of the land. And by
the way, the Lannisters are the British because they screwed everyone, and they they're snooty. I know Lannister always pays his debt. Yeah. And by the way, Trump's parents came from the United, or grandparents. UK
in general, yeah. Well, so this land that I can't remember the name always reminded me of Persia. Even
Dorne, I think it was.
Dorne,
yeah. That's where I still haven't thought about a character that deserves to be called Khal Drogo, because he's a badass in the show. And I don't know if Jason Momoa, how he got his role. One of the things, by the way, one of the guys that was in our race, Gordon Heslop, which we had a little love-hate relationship with him because he would never wear a suit and didn't like Trump because Trump was tough to.
Well, and I called him out several times because
I know.
He is with all due respect, it is what it is. He was an anti-Trumper, even though you mentioned that to him once, and he was like, "I'm not," and everyone's thinking. You've literally been booed off the stage twice because
But I'll tell you, one of the last times I saw him, he actually sent me a really nice note. Really nice guy, and we talked because he's from New Zealand, and we talked about the All Blacks. One of my bucket list items is to watch the All Blacks rugby team play, and
I've seen them play, and
they do the haka dance, right?
Yeah, in the rugby sevens in Hong Kong.
Right.
I've seen them play. Also Fiji and all the other amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
the sevens and the 15s, are like they're different types of champions because some of them are good at sevens and some of them are good at full 15. But so what they do this haka dance, and I love this like this warrior indigenous
Yeah.
dance that the New Zealand All Blacks do. It's my
Yeah.
dream to go watch them. But Jason Momoa, when he wanted to get that role for Khal Drago, he just memorized the haka dance, and he shows up to the audition and he does the haka dance, and they're like, "You're our Khal Drago, you got it." That's how he got the part.
Wow, really?
He did the all blacks.
Well, he even
Ooga,
though
ooga, ooga, ooga. You know that he's doing the warrior dance, and he did that. That was his audition.
you know, I saw this deal where he was saying, despite the character that he played and he was on this famous TV show, he basically didn't make hardly any money and he was living out of a van the whole time.
I believe it. I mean, you got to imagine one of the things that was so incredible about Game of Thrones. It was like there was two camera crews year round, some location around the world filming, and they filmed like 8 or 9 different countries. I think King's Landing was Dubrovnik in Croatia, and then there's parts that are filmed in Ireland. I think some of the King's Landing parts, and then there's parts that they filmed in Iceland, they filmed in Spain, they filmed in Morocco. They had like two camera crews year round filming year round to get all this. I mean, they filmed a lot of different locations. It's just
Wow.
amazing. I mean, that was the other thing that was so beautiful about the show. Some of the sites that they picked, some of the most beautiful locations in the
Yeah.
world.
Oh yeah. I'm a big fan of the show.
I think the season 8 it kind of ended up a little bit.
Well, okay, so I love the show. I don't, the ending, I feel like they could have done so much more with it.
Now they got 2 spin-offs, and I haven't really gotten
Yeah.
too much into them. One of them is House of Dragons, I guess, and then there's another one.
Which is actually really good. I
Which is
love
actually
that.
really good, yeah. And
Yeah,
there's
I
another
like
one
it.
that came out, so maybe I'll start making some characters of the Iranian Revolution around
The
some of those other shows.
new one with Knight of the Realm or something like this. No,
Yes.
Knight of the Nine, something like that.
Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, it's okay. It's interesting. There's some good stuff. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as Game of Thrones, and I hope that it grows into something, and it has the potential to. There's some crazy parts to it. You should look at it. You might be able to take inspiration from some of it.
No,
But
I need to go back and watch the Game of Thrones from the beginning because there's just so much that I don't even remember. I got to go remember again.
but I'm completely invested in the series. So let's say the whole Game of Thrones universe. So I'm a big. I mean, I don't think that they could go wrong in my book at this point. So.
So Monty, what's next for you? I know we said an hour. We're at an hour 37 minutes, but this is great. That's why podcasts are great because the more you talk and you get to take a deep dive into a lot of different things. But what's next? What's next for Monty? I know that you have still political aspirations. I met Brennan Herrera at the Camp Baxter, actually at Beau French event last Monday. He was so nice. I hadn't met him before. I went up to him. He goes, "Dude, I got my butt kicked my first race too. In the last race, I lost by blah, blah, blah. Don't give up, just stay in there." And everyone says the same thing. And the whole goal is to stay relevant and serve. And then if there's an opportunity to be in office, to do it. But, I never thought my first time running for Congress I was going to win. But what do you got in the works? What's next for Monty Montanez?
So, I mean, I mentioned that I have a small business, and it is a business that serves both veterans and elderly in the community. So, being able to focus on that continues to allow me to serve the community. As far as political aspirations, absolutely, I'm going to run again. Which office and which district, and whether it's federal or local or state, that's to be determined. But yeah, the idea behind serving America, serving Americans, and serving my community is embedded in me. It's part of my DNA. And now that I've actually ran for office, I understand the impact of what all that means. And so I'm excited to do it again. I don't know what that's going to translate into, but I absolutely feel like I'm going to run for office again. So the steps that need to be taken this time, at least I have clarity on what that means and also how to do it, so I can make sure that I stay focused and I execute it the right way, and with intent to win next time, but always service
And you will.
oriented. And what about you?
You know, I took time off and I was in the middle of creating my business, my broker-dealer business, and trying to get, that off the ground. I just finished my EB5 book that I got coming out. So hopefully, instead of selling, I really want to give it away to foreign investors to help them identify the tricks and how to select a project, get your money back, to make sure that foreign investors that are trying to essentially immigrate to the United States, most of them pay in their lifetime $4.5 million in taxes. These are high net worth people that move here to want to become Americans. So I want to disseminate this book and do seminars and show them how to select a project and show them the process and the goods and bads. So that's my regular business. In terms of political aspirations, am I going to go jump into another race, last day and not be prepared? I'm not going to do that again. But if the right opportunity presents itself, definitely. But I think the two biggest ways I think I can stay relevant and help the community here and make sure that Texas and the United States don't change is, one, there's something like 200,000 Iranian Americans in Texas, and there's something like 2 million Iranian Americans in the United States. So we got 10% of them here in Texas, which is a big number.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, something less than 8% of them vote in a general, and probably none of them probably vote in a primary or in a runoff. So I'm trying to change that. There's a beautiful organization called Iran American Republican Council in California, and so I'm setting up their Texas chapter to
Nice.
go to seminars, get iPads or paper ballots, and get everyone, registrations, get everyone registered, do educational videos to educate Iranian Americans on how to vote, when the primaries are, when the different timelines are, so they're more involved in the civic. They just have so much power. 2 million people that are voters in the U.S. have so much power, and this is power that's not being used. So I want to educate and get them involved in the voting. And then, more importantly, I want to stay involved on this, this issue of Islamification. Not fighting Islam, but not fighting freedom of religion, but fighting radical Islam that's trying to basically, have military outposts under the guise of mosques, or have, invasions under guise of Islam-only communities. I really need to educate and explain to them that I've seen this movie and Iran was gone, and I've been a refugee, twice in my life. Hopefully Iran will come back, but I don't want that same thing to happen in our community. And a lot of people are not waking up to this. I need to speak up there, and I need to be more involved and wake people up. But I think the biggest impact that I can make is get more people involved in the political process, and then to a lesser extent, or maybe even to the same extent, there's these lobby organizations. One's called NIAC Council, it's National Iranian American, whatever. It was started as a student organization, but essentially they're doing lobbying for a foreign adversary, and I have no idea how they haven't gotten FARA violations. They've gotten potential FARA violations with a guy named Trita Parsi that runs it, who is essentially a stooge of the Islamic Republic, and he left that organization because they got FARA, red flags. And now he started a new organization called the Quincy Institute, and the two of the biggest funders were George Soros and the Open Society Foundation and the Rockefeller brothers. These are people doing lobbying to help their Islamic Republic survive. And I think a lot of Iranians, they're signing petitions to get them deported. What they don't understand is these guys are very sophisticated lobby. They're in every congressional office every week talking to members of Congress. The Quincy Institute has a $7 million budget. NIAC has a $1.5 million budget. You're not going to get them kicked out by, doing petitions. The way to get them kicked out is by having the Justice Department investigate them to see if they're actually, in fact, foreign instructions and foreign money. And that's how it really to go. So I think, as someone who's a lawyer, who, Adam and I know how to dig up FEC filings, we know how to dig up these filings. I want to make sure that we don't have foreign interference, and we don't have our politicians being bought out. And then there's another organization called MEK. That's the organization I was talking about, the Daenerys character. And it's run by this Islamist, Marxist, communist woman who wears a hijab, who are actually more brutal than the current Islamic regime. In fact, they're the Marxist group that helped them get in power. That took the U.S. embassy hostage. Now the problem is, they used to have a terrorist camp in Iraq, and they were basically Saddam Hussein allowed them there, and they would fight the Iranians. So they had this terrorist camp in Iraq called Camp Ashraf. And then when the U.S. after the second Gulf War, they didn't know what to do with them, so they gave them refuge to another country. Now they live in Albania. They have that same terrorist camp called Camp Ashraf in Albania, and the CIA has been keeping these guys on ice. Well, these guys are very sophisticated on lobby, have a huge budget, but they don't have that many followers. I think less than 2 or 3% of Iranians would support them, probably way less than 2%. And if there was ever them involved in any politics in Iran and the new Iran, the people of Iran would tear them apart because they hate them. If there's anyone they hate more than the current regime is the MEK, Mujahideen Khalq, which were designated as a terrorist organization in 1997. And then in a moment of weakness, Hillary Clinton and Obama got paid to remove them from the terrorist designation. But they're operating, and here's the crazy part. They get a budget from the CIA, big budget, I don't know what it is, and then they take that budget, the money they get from the U.S. government, and then they pay our politicians to do lobbying. So they're getting our own money and buying us with our own money, which is crazy. So I'm going to stay in the fight these things, and if the opportunity presents itself, I'll run for office. But let me tell you, I'm not running against you ever again.
Well, likewise. I mean, I feel like, and I mentioned this too on a post, that any future, not only in America, which I feel that, and I know that you would be a great servant leader to any constituency here in the U.S.
Thank you.
I mean, any group of people would really be lucky to have you. And then everything that you just shared right now, you're going to excel and you're going to exceed. But piggybacking off of that, I feel that any future government that the Crown Prince has, and so Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Yeah, so I apologize for my.
Well, no, you're good. Listen, I got you David Shaw on stage in front of a bunch of Iranians, so I was very proud of you.
I would encourage you to include this gentleman, Abtin Vaziri, in any type of coalition or any type of government that brings peace and democracy and freedom to the people of Iran. I think you have so much to offer in that transformation. So I really hope that that voice and that encouragement carries forward to your community, and they push for that. They need a lot of people like you.
Thank you very much. Listen, I've lived in Iran until I was 9 or 10, and then I've lived in the U.S. about 37 or so years. So I'm so much more American. I've lived in Texas 31. So I tell people, they're like, "Are you more Iranian or more American?" I'm like, "Neither. I'm Texan." So
Yeah.
I don't know if I would survive going back to Iran. I think I would. But I think my home is here. Texas is my home. But
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
But what I mean by that is that, as an American, though, and us
Yes.
understanding freedom and understanding the democratic process, we have so much to offer so many countries around the world in terms of consultation, right? And just being
I think
someone to
what
lean
I
on
would
and
be very
understand.
interested in is if they're trying to set up a new constitution, whether it's a parliamentary monarchy or
Republic or whatever.
whatever that is. I think me understanding the legal system, understanding the Constitution, and this Constitution is the most successful Constitution in the world. We're
I
celebrating
agree.
250-year anniversary, and I was in Germany and Italy for my cousin's wedding. She married a German guy, and I held court. And a lot of people, by the way, were conservatives. They're French, they're German, they're Italians, and they're like, we understand everything you guys have in the U.S., but one thing we don't understand, and we're conservative, but we don't understand your obsession with guns. And I explained to them, I said, listen, we have this democracy that's lasted 250 years, this constitutional republic, and the reason it's successful is because these checks and balances that we have in our government, because we recognize that humans are corruptible and they get corrupted. So we have checks and balances to make sure they don't. But what people don't understand, we have the executive branch, which is the president and all the agencies underneath it. We have the legislative branch, which is Congress, Senate and the House. And then we have the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court and, all the courts underneath it. And these three different parts of the government, they check and balance each other. But there's one checks and balance that everyone forgets. The most important checks and balance is the checks and balance that we, the people, have on our government, and that's with the Second Amendment and having guns. And if the people of Iran had Second Amendment and had guns, these mullahs would be out on their behinds 45 years ago, 46 years ago. It wouldn't take 47 years. That's why it's so absolutely important for the most important check and balance, which is If your government becomes too tyrannical, you have the right to bear arms and go overthrow the government. It has nothing to do with hunting. It has nothing to do with, school. And they said, what about the school shootings? I said, I hate the school shootings. It breaks my heart. But what's the alternative? Mao takes your guns away and kills 75 million people. Stalin takes your guns away, kills 30 million people. That's the alternative. We can afford a few more school shootings, as much as I hate to say that. That's disgusting to say, but we could afford a few more school shootings to make sure 75 million people don't get murdered by their government.
Yeah.
That's the part. That's the most important checks and balances, the Second Amendment.
Amen, brother.
Well, Monty, we went 49 minutes overboard, so this is great. This was the first episode, season 1, episode 1. So happy to have you here. Any last final thoughts you want to share with the audience?
Just pray. Have faith in one another. Have faith in your country. Have faith in your community, and just believe in God, because God is good all the time.
Monty had a hat that he had during the campaign, and I was wearing my opponent's hat, and on there it said serve. And I was like, who could disagree with that? It says serve. Whether you're serving the military, whether you're serving your community in a school board or city council, or whether you serve your state or your federal government as a political leader, we all have to abide by this. We all have to serve. I just thought it was a beautiful hat. Monty Montanez, thank you so much for being my first ever guest on the PPPP podcast. Wonderful having you, and God bless you.
You as well, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.